Welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast, featuring advice and interviews about athlete branding. Learn how marketing, public relations, and broadcasting can grow your brand. We also have special episodes to talk about recent news, events, and anything in the world of sports. The podcast is sponsored by Pliable, a versatile marketing, PR, and broadcasting company that identifies opportunities and creates tailored content for its clients. Now it's time to roll. Here's your host, Greg Glenn.
Thanks, and welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. Today we're talking about NIL with Christy Dosh. Christy is a former practicing attorney who is now a sports business contributor for Forbes and the founder of businessofcollegesports.com. She has written on the business of college sports for more than a decade, such as ESPN, Sports Business Journal, The Washington Post, and more. In addition to her reporting, Christy is the author of 2 books on the business of college sports, Saturday Millionaires and the Athletes NIL Playbook, which just came out. I am so excited to talk with her. Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So I want to start, obviously, let's talk about your background a little bit and kind of how you got into the business of college sports. And then tell us, obviously, we'll get into the book.
Yeah, I went to school to be an attorney. That was all I had ever really wanted to do. And I did practice for about 4.5 years. Nothing related to sports at all. I worked in corporate and real estate, but I wrote on the side about legal issues in sports because I was a huge sports fan. I happened to be in law school at the University of Florida for 1 football national championship and 2 basketball national championships. So it was quite the time to be a Florida Gator. And I got to see firsthand the impact it had on the entire town. And then, I remember reading articles in the student newspaper about how, applications were increasing and looking at the effect of that on enrollment, or was the school going to become more selective? And I think it just sort of tuned me into the business side of college sports. I had gone to a tiny little Division III with like 1,200 students. I don't even think we were quite 1,200. I think we were 1,100 and something. No football. So I went from that in undergrad to football, and basketball, winning national championships at Florida. And I just became fascinated by the business side and sort of became a student of it through my writing. And I was doing it just for fun. I never really thought it was going to lead to anything in my career. It was just sort of a creative outlet for me. But I ended up getting a book deal for my first book, Saturday Millionaires, and an offer from ESPN to go be their sports business reporter. Within like a month of each other, those 2 things happened back in 2011. And so I left practicing law and I have never gone back. I have been a sports business reporter and a consultant and speaker ever since then. And I tell people, NIL, I feel very full circle. Like one of the very first things I ever reported on was Ed O'Bannon's case, which revolved around name, image, and likeness. Yeah. And I remember thinking then that it was never going to happen. We were never going to get to a place where the NCAA was going to allow athletes to get paid for their name, image, and likeness. And now not only do we have that, we've got revenue sharing coming. So it's been interesting to see over the past 15 years that I've been writing how much things have changed.
And obviously, being down there at Florida, you've done an amazing, job by connecting with some athletes. You're educating people, which I'm a big fan of. I think that NIL can be so much more than it is now if schools and people like yourself and myself continue to educate. And I feel like that's a big missing piece here in NIL that hopefully you and I and a lot of others that we know that are in our network are going to try to push for, because I believe that, through your book, through other books, through other means of education, the more athletes that actually find out about NIL and that they can actually do it, will actually do it.
Yeah, there's a lack of education sort of across the entire ecosystem because, there have been some educational programs put in place for current college athletes. There is very little at the high school level. There is virtually none for parents of athletes. There's virtually none for coaches. In fact, I just put together an NIL certificate program at Florida specifically through their Institute for Coaching Excellence because coaches don't feel like they understand it well enough to be able to talk to recruits when recruits are asking them questions about it. And I've been brought into athletic departments across the country the last few years, not to meet with their students, but to meet with their administrators and their coaches. And so I think across the entire ecosystem, there is a lack of education.
Well, and also I think that does stem from this wild, wild west, right? Like there was no true document when, of course, the NCAA got kind of flat-footed, when this all happened and they had this interim policy and people were trying to figure this out versus, I mean, some people knew this was coming, like you and I, and we knew that this was eventually going to happen. But even the schools were kind of out of the loop. Then it was like, now we got to figure out what we're going to do. We've got athletes already making millions, at the stroke of midnight. And it just became a crazy time. I feel like we're making progress in that area. I think because we've started to educate a little bit more. Financial literacy is going to become a bigger piece here, which I'm really glad to see. Where have you seen maybe the greatest strides, let's say, in NIL since NIL started?
It probably is with the current college athletes. I still think there's a lot missing below that. We've sort of had states one at a time approving NIL at the high school level, and you still have states where it's not allowed. So it's a little all over the place at the high school level. At the college level, I feel like a lot of programming has been put in place, whether that's guest speakers coming in or it's access to recorded lessons or, matching them up with folks in the community and with alumni who could potentially help them. I've seen some schools do some amazing sort of like grassroots sort of organization and education where they've pulled in people from their business and their marketing departments, and reaching outside of athletics to that broader campus, which I'm a big proponent of because I teach NIL at UF in 3 different departments now, PR, sport management, and law. And I think people have underestimated the interest that non-athletes have in NIL. I mean, my classes fill up like as soon as they open, and it's not because of me, it's because they're so interested in NIL, and maybe they played sports in high school and didn't play in college, but they're interested in being around it, or they have a sibling who's an athlete, or they know they want to work in NIL afterwards, or they want to be in college administration, or they want to be an agent. There's this huge amount of interest from non-athletes, and if you could harness more of those non-athletes that are interested in it and more of these subject matter experts you have sitting in other departments on campus, I think there's an opportunity to have NIL benefit not just the athletes, but students across campus, and to really get some cool, cross department sort of integration. I have found higher education to be very siloed, and I think it's great on campuses that have figured out how to sort of pull everybody into this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I also like the fact that a lot of these athletes have friends that may be in sports management, and they'd rather trust that person probably to help them get started at least, or try to navigate this land. Now, I'm obviously a big proponent of having a professional to work with and getting an agent and all those things. But I feel like you're right, is that on campus, the first kind of contact they may have is with somebody, right, that says, hey, what about this? What about us working together? Maybe we could go get somebody that could help you, that kind of thing. I think that's an awesome opportunity. And there's really been a whole industry, that has now been created by NIL, which is really cool. And obviously people should be reading your book. So let's dive into that. Talk to me about the inspiration for writing the book, especially obviously, the Athletes NIL Playbook.
Yeah, it really came from that lack of education, especially for parents. I hope athletes will pick up this book and buy it as well. But, a lot of this was geared towards the parents that I was getting questions from. Before NIL, I had never received an email from the parent of an athlete ever for any reason. Like they didn't need me for anything. But since NIL began, I cannot keep up with the number of emails and DMs that I get from parents. And so eventually I started a Facebook group that I invited parents into and continue to grow and invite parents into, so I can answer questions sort of in mass, because everybody has the same few questions. So it's nice when you can answer it in front of everybody and we can all sort of get the benefit of the answer. They can oftentimes help each other. There's a parent in there, and she's a former D1 athlete herself. She has a daughter who I think is now 13, but I think when she first joined my group, I think that was 2 years ago. I think she was 11 at the time, and the daughter was really interested in NIL and wanted to be like the youngest athlete in her state to do an NIL deal, and that got her mom interested in looking into more of it. But like they've been doing it for a couple of years now, so they will jump in the group and answer questions. It's not just my expertise. I really feel like we've got some great expertise from people who are sort of living it right now too. And over time, I kind of developed like, here are the subjects that are coming up over and over, or here are the issues I see coming up over and over. And I started organizing it into a book. I actually wrote the outline for this book in October of 2021. So right after NIL went into place. And I was having to go back into the outline and change things. I felt like every single day. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I can't write this book right now. Like, we don't know enough about what NIL is going to look like. And now I'm really glad I waited, because I was able to incorporate a lot of case studies and stories about athletes who have successfully navigated it, because now we're a few years in and I could look at people and say, okay, this person did something unique with their NIL, but you can learn from this and you can do it with yours. And I was able to show a lot of examples, and I made sure the examples were relatable. It wasn't athletes that had millions of followers. You probably won't even recognize the name of most of the athletes in the book. Now, the Cavender twins wrote the foreword, and I'm so grateful that they did. I'm not going to tell anyone they can be the Cavender twins. You can't, I promise. But I tried to make sure the other athletes, they're across all three divisions. They're from a variety of sports. They're not household names for the most part, because I wanted to show that NIL really is for anyone who wants to participate in it. And I just wanted to give parents and athletes those tools to get started and to ensure that they're doing things the right way, and that they're not hiring the wrong people, they're not signing the wrong contracts, and just try my best to educate on as much of sort of the system as I could.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And obviously, I go about it the same way. Case studies, I think about Emma Eubank and Hannah Dukeman, who I helped, with these Cure Cancer cleats. And that's one of my favorite stories. I wrote a book about it, right? So I decided, much like you, I was like, when am I going to write a book? Because everything just keeps changing. So I was like, I'm going to write a book about something that already happened.
Right.
And so that was my approach. And obviously it's a great story. If you haven't, heard about it, anyone listening, look up, Hannah Dukeman, Emma Eubank, and Curing Cancer. That's one of my favorite case studies. What about yours from the book? What maybe stuck out to you as you wrote the book and said, wow, this one's amazing?
Yeah, one that sticks out to me that wasn't like, flashy, isn't going to make headlines. But I was introduced, I kind of sent out feelers to a lot of people I knew in the NIL space and said, okay, I know the athletes I have had in my classes, or I did a program with Meta for female athletes. I've got these athletes I've interacted with directly, but I know there's other athletes out there doing great things. And I sort of had an idea of the different ways you could make money on your NIL, but for some of them, I didn't really have an example of somebody doing it and doing it well. And one of those was like camps, clinics, lessons.
Yes.
And when I was in college, I did not play my sport in college. I grew up playing softball, and I decided ultimately not to play in college. I taught pitching lessons and I coached high school while I was in college, and I made great money teaching pitching lessons back in 2000 to 2003, and parents pay even more money for that stuff now.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's got to be an athlete out there that's doing this really well. I just don't know who they are. And I put my feelers out, and I was introduced to Kate Urbani, who's a track and field athlete at Baylor. And she's profiled in the book because she is one of those who is doing a fantastic job with lessons. And she told this wonderful story about working with a youth athlete who thought that they couldn't run, like didn't have the ability to run like distances. And she got him just running around town there in Waco and talking while they're running, and just not really thinking about, how far you're running and how hard it is and whatever. And, now this kid loves to run and has like a future as a track and field athlete. And she has been engaged in some camps and clinic kind of settings as well. She ultimately would like to coach after her college career. So I think she's a great example of somebody who not only is making money on something with their NIL right now, but they're doing something that's going to give them hard skills and experience they can put on their resume for the job they want after graduation. And I've seen so many athletes do that really well in a number of different areas. So there's a chapter 2 on using NIL to set yourself up for success after graduation. And I wanted to profile some of those athletes that were tying that NIL activity into their future career.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Some of the athletes I've worked with, Katie Shanahan has been running camps since she was at a high school. Cash McClure, who's now started his own LLC and, has his own basketball training business. I mean, that's the true NIL that I think about. And so much so that, to your point, that's one of the biggest things and ways I can help these athletes is I actually created pliablecamps.com. I was like, I've got so many athletes that want to do this, and I can now create one website where somebody who wants to learn about basketball may have a sister who plays field hockey. Now they can come to the same place and go look at all these camps and clinics. And these kids aren't building websites for these camps yet, you know what I mean? Depending on where they are. And then people can come there and find it. So I think you hit on the nail on the head with that one. And I think that's something that anybody could do. And I love the example of track because most people aren't like starting camps for track. You know what I mean? Yeah. Usually it's this basketball or, whatever it may be. So I love that idea and very inspirational. So I love that. Let's talk about, going into this, obviously, we talk about success after sport. And obviously you did write, some stuff on that in the book. And tell me why. I know why mental health obviously is a huge reason for when they're done with their career, whether it be in college, whether it be pro. Talk to me about what you kind of found through writing the book that's most important, that you wanted to convey about life after sport.
Yeah, many of them just don't know who they are outside of being an athlete. And for years, I've gone to events on campuses, and specifically at UF, they have an event every year called Stay in the Game. It is an incredible event that Linda Teeler started when she was the SWA at UF. She's now at the NCAA, but she still came back for this event this year because this is the event that she built. And it's all the female athletes at UF. They come in and there's a couple of dozen, close to 3 dozen women like myself who work in different areas of sports. And we come in and we all sit in a giant line at the front of the room and we all say what we do for a living. And then we break up into these small groups and we do these small group discussions and we give them a chance to meet with people who are in the industry they think they could be in. And year after year after year, I mean, I've done this for a lot of years. I've heard athletes just saying they do not know who they are outside of their sport. If they were to get injured or just when their eligibility is up, maybe they're in a sport where going pro isn't an option, or maybe they are in a sport where there's a pro option, but they know that they're not at that level. They just don't know who they want to be or what they're good at. And I have found over the years, male and female, that they don't think they have any like skills or experience to even put on a resume. Like I used to do these resume writing workshops in athletic departments, and they would be like, well, I don't have anything to put on there. I've never had a job before. That's like, well, being an athlete was your job, and there's all these soft skills you gain from it. And so for a long time, those discussions on campus have always been about the soft skills you get from being an athlete, time management and leadership. And I think all those things are important. And it's why a lot of companies do recruit college athletes. But now athletes are starting to gain hard skills in content creation and video editing, in podcasting. I worked with Leah Clapper at UF. She designed a board game. She had to figure out, how do you get an actual physical board game made? How do you distribute it? How do you sell something online? She learned about email marketing, and doing sales funnels. She learned hard skills in using her NIL opportunities. And at graduation, I had 2 companies reach out to me and say, how do we get in touch with Leah? Because we want to hire her. I mean, she was very sought after when she graduated. And so I love that NIL is giving those opportunities to figure out, what do you love outside of your sport? What are you good at outside of your sport? And how can you translate that into a career? Because I do think a lot of them face a little bit of a mental health issue, a crisis at graduation where they have no idea who they are outside of their sport. And I really do think NIL is helping to bridge that gap, because I've met so many now who something they did during NIL introduced them to a person or to an industry or to a career path that they didn't know existed. And like, I love that part of NIL. I mean, there are things about NIL that make me crazy, but this is the part of NIL that I love and I can embrace.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's such an investment in themselves. I tell that to a lot of the athletes that I work with. Yes, there's the NIL side of the money that you've heard about. But there's a lot of other things that come with it, the networking, these hard skills, like you said, building out the things that you like, the things you enjoy, opportunities to work with businesses and learn more about different industries, or skills that you like, skills you don't like. And that's really helpful, I think, for a lot of these athletes. So let's dive into the next phase of NIL. which is obviously the House settlement. And that's just obviously, moved through the courts finally. We waited a long time for this. I feel like here, at least in the early, few weeks afterwards, I think there's a lot of still moving and shaking going on, but I am a little bit more optimistic now than I was before. Obviously, we had the settlement.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because I just got done putting together CLE materials for a program I'm going to do with lawyers in a couple of weeks about all the problems the settlement has
Still
created.
exists, yeah.
I'm having a hard time being optimistic right at this moment because I just got done doing like a bulleted list of all the issues we have. There is a lot of discussion around whether the cap that's put in place for revenue sharing, which is 20.5 million this first year per school, that the cap itself violates antitrust law. There's a lot of discussion about Title IX and what is
Yes.
going to be appropriate under Title IX in terms of how you distribute. And I can tell you, I was just at the NACDA convention 2 weeks ago. I sat on a panel with a Title IX attorney and an athletic director, and they had a very spirited discussion about what would and would not pass Title IX muster, and they weren't on the same page about it. And I had multiple other conversations that week with people who weren't on the same page about it, and there is no like bright line rule that we can say you have to do it this way and you'll be safe. I mean, that doesn't exist with Title IX. But I think there are some of those challenges coming up. In fact, we've already seen an appeal to part of the House settlement,
Yep.
the back pay based on Title IX. And then I am working on a new story now that by the time this comes out, I probably will have already published. So I'll say it now. There's a company out there going around buying up the claims of athletes for their back pay, and they're offering them 10 cents on the dollar to sell their claim now. That company would then collect later. So say an athlete ended up with $150,000 in back pay. This company is offering them, I'll give you $15,000 right now. If you sign over your claim to me, we'll collect the $150,000 in the future or whatever it ends up being after the appeals have cleared. But you get the 15 right now to just walk away from it. And that's really compelling to some of these athletes who, don't have money saved up, who, maybe they tried to go pro. Like one of the guys I was talking to, he tried to go pro for a couple of years. It hasn't worked out. He doesn't know what his career is going to be next. They're offering him a few $1,000s right now. He needs that for rent next month. And I get that, but it also feels really predatory to me. And I'm having a really hard time stomaching it after reading the contract. So, as much as I think there's some, we've settled some things with what revenue sharing is going to look like going forward. To me, there's still a lot around this settlement that isn't settled.
Absolutely. And I think it's always going to be that way. I think there's just so many rules and there's so much involved, obviously. I think you're right on the Title IX side. I think you're right on the antitrust stuff. And so now, as we move forward, Christy, let's talk about some of the things that you're watching as this continues to evolve. I know you mentioned some of those things, but what do you think is next, maybe from a positive side, that's going to come from this revenue sharing?
I do think because there are positives and negatives to the new roster limits. There are a lot of negatives in the sense of roster spots that are essentially getting cut, and a lot of sports, the new roster limits are well below the average roster size they were carrying. And so there has been a lot of discussion about the places where athletes are losing spots. But football is one where I'm really interested to see what happens because previously they were allowed 85 scholarships. Now they can have a roster limit of 105. So you're going to have 20 more guys potentially who can be on a full scholarship under this new roster limit. But that's your limit. And there were Division I, a lot of Power 5 or Power 4 now football programs that were carrying 140, 150. I saw a 180 man roster. So they're stockpiling players and they're not going to be able to do that anymore. So I'm actually really interested to see what that looks like. And we're not going to know the first few years because they're allowing schools to tag some athletes as designated student athletes. Athletes who would have been cut because of the new roster limits, right. They get that tag applied to them and then they don't count against the roster. So this isn't going to sort itself out immediately. But say 5 years from now, I think we're going to start to see the effect of that where a school can't sit on 180 players. There's going to be 75 people they would have liked to recruit and get on the team that are going to end up somewhere else. So I do wonder if that helps parity in college football some.
Yep. And then obviously, speaking of parity, do you feel like, and I know a lot of people are saying here, the rich are going to get richer. in the sense that now we've got obviously this revenue sharing, and the schools that are opting in are going to opt in, and those are going to be some of your most prominent, as you said, Power Four schools. Do you see any opportunity here for other sports? Like I'm thinking football is going to have its haves and have-nots, essentially. I feel like. How are you feeling about other sports, the non-revenue generating sports, coming out of the settlement?
Yeah, there's some good and bad. I mean, I do think there are some sports that are going to end up being cut for budgetary reasons. It'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out, because also schools have to continue to comply with Title IX, obviously. So how they're going to go about cutting, are they going to move some teams to club status? I think we're still seeing how all of that is going to play out. But I am interested to see which sports some schools are choosing to pay outside of football and men's basketball, because we sort of expect the Power Four, they're all going to opt in, they're all going to pay football and men's basketball. I've been keeping track of sort of what people have announced, and I've seen I've seen baseball and softball get revenue sharing money. I've seen gymnastics, I've seen volleyball, wrestling, men's ice hockey, soccer. I mean, I've seen some other sports. Now they're not going to be getting the kind of numbers the football athletes are going to be getting, or the basketball athletes, but they're going to be getting something. And so I actually think that's really interesting to see, okay, which sports does this school think are their most successful, or, drive the most fan interest, drive the most revenue? What does that look like? And the lists that are coming out, even among schools that are in the same conference, look different when you get outside ball and men's basketball. I've seen some that I would say most are paying women's basketball, but then it's kind of a crapshoot from there. And then you've got the schools that don't play FBS football at all. So a lot of the discussion has been about Big East schools. They can invest a lot more money in basketball because they don't have to pay football. And so will you see the Big East start to, sort of
make a comeback?
Not that they're bad now, but will you see them become even more competitive and even more formidable because they're able to spend more on basketball than a Power Four with an FBS program is able to? And that really just depends on what's going to happen with outside NIL. Like, how much are collectives still going to be able to put together in NIL deals on top of revenue sharing that would allow a Power Four to still funnel a lot of money to men's basketball? And what is the clearinghouse going to have to say about it? Because now we've got this NIL clearinghouse from Deloitte, NIL Go. They are going to look at transactions from entities like collectives and determine whether they are in a reasonable range of compensation, is their verbiage. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet. I've heard some deals have already been turned down, but I don't think many details have been made public yet.
Yeah. All right. So all that being said, I imagine you're probably going to have at least a sequel to this book, and probably try to keep up with all of it when it does come. But for the meantime, let's focus on how people can get the book and all the places that they can get it now.
I'm really lucky that I sent it to print in March and nothing's wrong. I really worried something would happen with the House settlement. And so there's a lot of statements that are in there. They're like, ask the printing of this book. And I just went on the assumption revenue sharing was going to happen. So the final chapter is on revenue sharing. And I'm so pleased to say that everything in there is still accurate and up to date now that it's out. And I'm going to be keeping a website where I add additional resources and keep things updated. So you can go to the athletesnilplaybook.com. That will get you links if you want to order the book or learn more about what's inside it. And then also I'll be continuing to add resources. The book was not supposed to come out until July 2nd. They put it out early and it came out a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm a little behind on getting the resources up because I thought I had July 2nd to do that. So those will be going up there soon. And you can find it at all the major retailers, Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. And I am frequently talking about it and sharing pieces of it on my social media. You can find me pretty much everywhere at SportsBizMiss, BizMiss.
Well, and you do a fantastic job, Christy. I will say you're one of the best in the industry, and a lot of respect for what you do. And thank you, on behalf of the athletes I work with and athletes that have contacted me, and the website that you had, Business College Sports. Like, I know a lot of people use that as a resource. I use it for the SMWW class that I teach. And so we're going to be adding your book as well. So fantastic resources, but you're a fantastic person and you go about it the right way. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. Same thing. I think you go about it the right way. I talk to people all the time that ask me, "Do I know you? And do I know the stuff that you teach? And what do I feel about it?" And I feel the same way about you. I think we are on the same wavelength and want to do the same thing as far as educating athletes and parents and the rest of the ecosystem. So thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely, Christy. And I'm looking forward to having you back. So we will definitely continue to talk more and keep in touch. And again, thanks again so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. That is Christy Dosh. I am Greg Glynn. We are glad you could tune in and stay pliable, my friends.
Thanks for listening to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode and catch up on recent episodes at pliablemarketing.com. We also encourage you to share topics and guest ideas by emailing our production staff at pliablemarketing@gmail.com. We love hearing from our loyal listeners and athletes who want to grow their brand. So jump in and be part of the podcast because that's how we roll.